I'm very delighted to see so many familiar faces here, as well as some. So thank you for coming. The maritime industry is essential for Australia's economy and our way of life. We rely on ships to move our goods and people and to support our coastal communities. However, the maritime industry is also complex and challenging. And certainly the incidents in the last few years have shown us there are a number of issues with shipping. Ships are prone to accidents, grounding, fires, and even worse, environmental pollution. The Great Barrier Reef is an iconic and essentially important for Queensland economy and Australia's economy. It is home to an incredible diversity of marine life and plays a vital part in country's economy. It is our responsibility to protect the Great Barrier Reef from all threats, including maritime accidents. This symposium provides an excellent opportunity for us to learn from each other and to look at developing new strategies for preventing and managing incidents in the Great Barrier Reef. We have a distinguished panel of experts with us here today who would certainly share their knowledge and insights and help us carry this conversation. I'll take a few moments to introduce the panel. The panel is being moderated by Mr. Angus Mitchell. Angus is the Chief Commissioner and CEO of Australian Transport Safety Bureau, Australia's statutory and independent national transport safety investigator. Angus graduated from the University of Sydney with a Bachelor of Education before serving for almost 2 decades in the Royal Australian Navy, in seagoing as well as land operational roles spanning the globe. On leaving the Navy, Angus spent 10 years in the civilian maritime industry, including time as Deputy Harbour Master for the ports of Sydney and Botany, Executive Director for New South Wales Maritime, and more recently, General Manager of MSQ. Angus joined the ATSB in September 2021. Please join me in welcoming Angus. We have on the panel Jim Huggett. Jim is the Executive Director of Port Operations and BTS with MSQ. Jim is the Deputy State Marine Pollution Controller in Queensland and has had considerable experience in marine incident response over the years, including Pacific Adventurer spill in 2009 and Shen Neng 1 incident in 2010. In 2001, Jim was presented with an Australia Day Medallion Award in recognition of services to marine environment protection in Queensland. In 2021, Jim was awarded the Public Service Medal for outstanding service to maritime safety and marine incident response in Queensland. Prior to joining MSQ, Jim was a naval officer, commander hydrography in the Royal Australian Navy. Please join me in welcoming Jim. Next on the panel, we have Stephen McMeeking. Stephen is currently the Manager Inspection with AMSA. Prior to this, Stephen was the Principal Regional Surveyor and Senior Surveyor in Brisbane and Melbourne. Before joining AMSA, Stephen was a surveyor with American Bureau of Shipping around Asia in various roles. Stephen is dual trained and certified both as a Master Mariner and Chief Engineer. Please welcome Stephen to the panel. We have with us Michael Tracey. After working as a tradesman in the residential and commercial building industry for nearly 15 years, Michael commenced employment with the Queensland Fire and Emergency Services in 2007 as a recruit firefighter. Working up through the ranks, he is currently a first-class firefighter working at stations in the Brisbane region as a first responding firefighter. Please welcome Michael. We have with us Stefanie Andrensek. Stefanie is a senior associate at Sparke Helmore Lawyers, specializing in admiralty and maritime-related disputes. She has acted on behalf of vessel owners, divers, and governments in response to maritime casualties. Recently, she has worked on maritime emergencies involving the vessels Frontier Unity and AG Neptune in Australia and the Express Pearl in Sri Lanka. Please welcome Stefanie to the panel. And we have Captain Ganapathi Pandanda. Captain Ganapathi is an experienced seafarer with over 18 years of experience sailing on bulk carriers, LPG, and LNG carriers. He holds a bachelor's degree in nautical technology from Mumbai University and an unlimited master's license from both India and Australia. Captain Ganapathi worked as a marine consultant with Cargo Care from 2016 until 2020. And since December 2020, he has been with Wallenius Wilhelmsen, a leading global shipping company. I'm sure that we'll get to learn a lot from this panel. But before we start, I would like to take a moment and thank the people who made this event happen. First, MSQ and SmartShip for their continuous support to the branch, which plays a pivotal role in us making these events happen. I would also like to thank the branch committee members who have worked tirelessly in the background to put this together. Finally, I would like to thank all of you for finding time from busy schedules to come here. With this, I would like to hand over to Angus. And I'm sorry, just forgot one thing. We got water in the fridge there, cold and room temperature as well. So if any one of you need any refreshments and water, please feel free to help yourself. Thank you. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you. And look, and I'm just going to give a little bit of context with what we're going to go through this afternoon. Obviously, it's a hypothetical situation where we're looking to tease out some of the challenges and some of the realities of risks involved in shipping, in particular, in this case, car carrying. What I've asked each of the panel members here, who are obviously subject matter experts in their own areas, is to keep their answers very short. Not so much that they can therefore demonstrate how smart they are, but the idea being that we can have a free-flowing conversation and we can allow some things and some scenarios to develop that they may not be comfortable with, but equally so that we can start playing down, and from my side, is where things may go in a real situation, not simply in the context of a hypothetical where everyone has time and they don't have the pressures on them. So it's going to be, hopefully, a fairly lively exchange between the participants here, but equally, we will leave some time towards the end for audience members, both online through the chat here, to ask any specific questions of the panel members or to challenge any of the answers that they may give from your own perspective. So what we're going to start here is with a scenario, and that scenario is a car carrier. So this is a car carrier, 199 metres long, 32 metres beam width, just under 9 metres draft, 24 crew and a coastal pilot. So it's en route from Singapore down to Brisbane. And from what we understand, there's around 3,500 vehicles on board. So I'm just going to start with the captain first. Is this normal? Is it a normal size ship? How many of these ships will be transiting the reef at any given time?
So this is pretty much normal when it comes to high and heavy as well as cars. And for our shipping line, we had once a month going through the reef up till Jan. And we have about 9 to 10 ships calling Brisbane every month, and they go down the coast. And in terms of the general traffic around the reef, you can easily say there are 2 to 3 ships that go through that part every month. And a ship like this usually takes about 24 to 48 hours to load in port. And in terms of amount of people that take to load a ship like this, if you're working in Australia, you're looking at 25 to 30 people a shift working it over 2 days. If you talk a port like China, you will probably have 60 to 80 people working on it, and the output is a lot faster. And then you would want me to touch on the...
No, that's enough. So obviously there are many of these ships going down. We've got a reef pilot here. Yep. How many of the ships would have you piloted car carriers down the reef? None. No.
Well, to be in the reef virtually continuously.
Be one continuously.
So, allowing about 4 days for transit, you could virtually say there'd be one. There's at least one a week going either mostly south.
Okay, so we've established the scenario is very real, and just from hearing there, obviously at any given time there's at least one. How about coming into the port of Brisbane as a port pilot? How many of these are coming in that you're seeing? One a day.
Sometimes 2 when it gets busy.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Stefanie now. Who owns the cargo on board? What's it worth? Is the cargo worth more than the ship? What sort of considerations when you insure for something like this?
Sure. So the cargo could be owned by one person or it could be owned by many entities. It really depends. So, for example, if all the cars were put on there by, say, Mitsubishi, they might all be owned by the same company, or they might be put on by different entities. For example, they might have been sold on to different dealerships already who would already own that cargo. The cargo, in terms of a ship like this, I'm no expert on the value of ships. I'm sure there's somebody in the audience who could do that much better than I could. But I would estimate that the cargo would be worth more than the ship. If we take, for example, the recent car carrier fire, Felicity Ace, the cargo on there was worth about 400 to 500 million, and the ship was about 25 million.
Okay, so it's fair to say here we're looking at the cargo being worth more than the ship, and we've got multiple of them at any given time going down the reef. Now, just in terms of loading the ship, Captain, how do you get 3,500 units on board a ship like this?
Yeah, as I touched in, you're looking at 24 to 48 hours, and talking about distances, they are parked anywhere. This is the rampway, but in actual on the deck, they'll be parked. The distance between the cars will be anywhere from 10 centimeters to 20 centimeters. And the lashing is designed as such that nobody really can walk in between the cars. It's mostly the forward and aft rims that are lashed. So you will have about 50 centimeters from bumper to bumper, but on the sides, you're looking at about 10 to 20 centimeters at the max. And yes, they're all usually driven into stow, so they can be driven out in the port of discharge. 25, depending on where it is being loaded. If it's in Australia, you'll have 25 to 30 people a shift. If it's overseas, you'll probably have more people there. And then, yeah, as you can see, the side walkways are clear, but anything in between is very difficult to access when it comes to.
Okay, so, and actually what I might do, I think that question there, just make sure on the panel that looking forward, so they're picking up the microphones there. How many decks?
12 to 13 decks on most ships, and we have a mix of cars as well as high and heavy. So you're looking at 4 decks with high and heavy, and the rest having cars.
Okay, so here's the scenario. We're looking at 10:00 local time, and the position that we've got the ship coming from, as I said, Singapore down to Brisbane, is just off Cape Flattery. For those that don't know, that's probably what 120 nautical miles north of Cairns down through the reef. Just the reef pilots, part of the compulsory pilotage area? Yes. Right, yeah. So pilot's on board, and is on board because of regulations set by AMSA on compulsory pilotage. Now, what we've got is around about 15 knots of wind, and the wind's coming from the southeast. So not particularly adverse conditions at this time. 10 o'clock in the morning, full visibility. What we first get is 10 car alarms going off on 10 deck, and 1 suspected car fire. So going back to the captain, what's the first indications that there is an issue on board, and what are the first reactions from the captain?
So in no particular order, we have a smoke and flame detector on board. So as soon as the alarm goes off on the bridge, and everybody are heading towards muster stations, majority of our ships have CCTV cameras on deck. So that's the first place where the watchkeeper would go to see if he can sight something. And then as the muster's happening, there'll be a search party that will go on location if the CCTV is unable to capture anything major or big. So they will be headed that way. And then the usual drill scenario wherein the rest will be headed to the muster station. Engine room will be manned because it's under pilotage. And then the master and the pilot will be then starting the actions depending on what the scenario is.
Okay, so I'm just going to go back just to actually pilot. What's your role here when you get an emergency like that, where you've got one car on fire, you've got alarms going off? Is there a notification that you need to make?
You would have to tell Reef BTS straight away. There's an issue.
Okay, so Reef BTS has now been informed by the master, and by the pilot, and the pilot said that the next update will be in 20 minutes' time. So, Jim, from a Reef VTS point of view, you've just got a report. Where is that Reef VTS located? What are they doing with the report from the pilot?
Okay, so Reef VTS is located in Townsville, and it monitors the whole of the Great Barrier Reef in a route. We have a Reef VTS north and south. So straight away, once the Reef VTS VTSO had picked up that message, from the pilot, we'd start compiling a situation report. The most important thing of any incident is the first half an hour or hour. It's crucial. So we want to know what's happening. Is there a fire? What's the situation? What's the status of the decks? Where is the vessel? Initial indications are that it's in our jurisdictions. The states have jurisdictions over 3 nautical miles. Commonwealth seaward of that. Yeah, so sit rep information, what's going on board. We'd like to get that information as soon as possible.
So I'm going to stop you there. Okay, noting where it is there any peculiarities there? What sort of coverage do you have? Do you have radar coverage there? Is it AIS coverage? Is it just VHF? What's Reef VTS got at their disposal to gather more of a picture?
Okay, so we don't have all the radars we previously had. So we've got AIS coverage there and also VHF direct to the ship. Yeah.
At this stage, is it being contained within Reef VTS and the manager, or are notifications going higher up within MSQ?
No, there's going to be a notification up to higher up in MSQ. So they would typically go to Kel Dillon, the general manager, and also the harbour master for Far North Queensland, who is based in Cairns. There'd also be a very compiled sit rep and information provided to JRCC in respect to what's going on with the ship. So they're the key stakeholders at this point.
How concerned are you? At the moment, it's simply potentially a fire, some alarms going off. That's all that you understand. Is this run of the mill for shipping in the reef? Or is this something that is triggered to the highest level straight away?
So at this stage, Angus, it's precautionary. It's getting ready. It's establishing our procedures. There's no clear indications yet that we've got a major fire on board, but we're looking and planning towards the worst. So we're sort of ramping up, you might say.
Okay, so what other information are you asking for on the vessel itself? At the moment, you've got a name of the vessel, but that's it. Presumably you don't have manifests, you don't have anything else at your disposal. What are you trying to find out?
Yeah, so those key issues that we're looking for, Angus, we want a manifest from the ship. We want to know how many crew are on board. We'd like to know the firefighting capacity of the ship, what it has as far as appliances goes.
Okay, just going to the captain, who's going to provide that information and how quickly can that be provided back to MSQ?
So as per emergency procedures, there will be a duty officer on the bridge whose main job is going to be communicating and getting the sit rep done. So he will be noting down time stamping with what's happening on board, as well as communicating with the authorities with regard to what is happening on the ship.
Okay, Stefanie, anything from your end? Is anyone notifying you at this stage, or is it too low down in the weeds?
So
It's an alarm. That's all we've got at the moment. Maybe fire, just an alarm.
I suppose the captain can help with this, but best practice would be that as soon as there was, an emergency scenario, that the owner, the management of the ship would be informed by the master. If that was then escalated to the owners in the club, they would then get us involved as P&I correspondent lawyers. However, at this stage, it's just an alarm. It probably wouldn't have come to us yet. It would probably wait until it was an actual fire scenario.
Okay. Now, Jim mentioned earlier on that one of the notifications is likely to be to JRCC, which sits within AMSA. How often are you getting reports like this, alarms going off potential fires, or what could be a very small fire reported to JRCC?
Yeah, a couple of reports a week, but this one will be a bit different because we'll probably get the notification first from Reef ETS. The master's going to be dealing with the fire and the initial response, and he's not going to have time to email the RCC. He might have time to phone them, depending on the company and their procedures. But our first notification would probably come from Reef ETS. Reef ETS would copy in the regional manager here in Brisbane. So that would be the first visibility. And then probably a couple of phone calls between the regional manager and the regional harbour master here to see what information they had. And then depending on how quick RCC responds to this, they would look at it and triage and go, all right, is this an immediate incident? They'd start that process and go, well, it's a fire at the moment. And then it's that assessment of whether they need to call the vessel and say, Captain, what's happening? Or whether they wait for the vessel to call them, because obviously the master's busy dealing with the incident. You don't want to be phoning him and saying, what's going on? It's a bin fire. What are you phoning me for? So that's an analysis the SIROs make. This situation here, probably the regional manager might be phoning Reef ETS and say, what do you know?
10 o'clock on a weekday, how many people in a JRCC?
2, 3.
2 or 3.
Be 2 SIROs and a shift manager.
Okay, and what's their notification triage process here for something that, again, is still just an alarm potential fire? Does it go any higher in the executive of AMSA, or it's dealt with at their level?
Not at that. The RCC manager would go, yeah, okay, we'll need more information before we escalate it. The way the peculiarities of the reef is, we would have got that notification in Brisbane from Reef ETS. And we'll be working there'll be two lines working.
Right, so Jim had just mentioned before that it sits within 3 nautical miles, so most likely under the responsibility of MSQ. Is AMSA really concerned at this stage at all? It's not within your area of responsibility?
Of course, would be concerned. It's seafarers on it. It's a collaborative approach. It's not cross the 3 mile line. It's what's happening, what help do we need, what are we going to do? Very collaborative approach.
Okay, so we're now looking that we've got the manifest from the ship. There's 3,500. It's still, we haven't gone into detail exactly the makeup or anything else on board. Looking at car fires just as a normal internal combustion engine fire. Presumably, Mick, you've been to plenty of these fires.
Yeah.
What sort of, when you know you're going to an internal combustion engine fire, is it just a standard call out? Is there anything that you do as a firey on your preparation on your way to the fire?
It's usually just a 1 truck response. So that's a crew of 4. That's usually just 1 firefighter. He puts on full PPE, BA, and 1 hose line, and that's enough to attack that vehicle. So,
and what's the method for putting out a standard car?
that's can be water or water with foam. So like a Class A foam is added with the water, which works well with the ice vehicle.
How long does it normally take to put out just a standard car fire?
You knock the fire down in probably 10-20 seconds, and then you, with a thermal imaging camera, you'll then go over it and cool everything down. So that takes a lot more water.
Okay, so you've got that car fire now is not on the side of a highway, it's inside a parking lot. Any other different considerations if you're going into a multi-storey park lot such as 12 stories high?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So getting there, you can't get the truck there. So it's like the high rise procedure. So you've got to take all your gear up to the car park and get to the right level and tack it from there. So it's a lot different. And the exposures, all the other cars around you, completely different.
So it's different because of the risk of sympathetic deafness or for other cars to start catching on.
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
Okay. What's the sort of standard distance between cars in a car park?
It depends how they park. Half metre to a metre, I suppose.
Presumably, so both doors can open and people
Yeah,
get out.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, which is obviously very different.
And you can
10 centimetres.
get around them. Yeah.
Okay, now we're a little bit further advanced. So that 20 minutes is now starting to run down, and you haven't heard any more information, Jim. How are you chasing up? Are you concerned you're not hearing any more? And if you are, what's the mechanism to get more information?
Yeah, we are starting to get a bit more concerned. Sometimes silence is bad because silence equals, panic, potentially trying to find out what's happening without informing the responders. So silence is bad for me. So we'd be establishing an incident management team in Brisbane and Townsville or Cairns. We would also be relying on Reef EDS to prompt the ship's crew, the master, the coastal pilot, what's going on. We need more information. We can't do that situational awareness or sit rep until we have information. At the moment, information's scant, so we're going to start pushing from Reef EDS to get that information. Yep.
So who's taking the lead on that, given that it's within one of the harbour master's jurisdiction? Is that harbour master now providing information to you, or are you directing the harbour master, or is Kel directing the harbour master?
Well, in the first instance, Angus, as you would recall from your time at MSQ, we've got the coast broken up into regions. So that's Cairns region, Captain Dave Ferguson, who's on leave. So we'll revert back to Frank D'Souza, Harbour Master Townsville, which is advantageous because he's got Reef EDS right next to him. So there's an advantage to that anyway. And then we would start, providing sit reps up top back to Cal Dillon and myself. And Cal would be informing the minister. The minister would want to know what's going on. Are we overreacting? No. You'll never get penalised for overreacting. You will get penalised for underreacting. So that's where we're moving at the moment.
So I might just go that to Kel then. You've got this report from the harbour master. You still don't have all the information. It's 20 minutes into when the fire was first reported. You still haven't got the manifest yet as to what's on board. Are you bothering the minister at this point?
Yeah, probably. So first of all, I go through the Director General. In the first 20 minutes, it's probably Director General first of all before I go to the Minister directly, and the DG may well get the Minister heads up, mostly by text first of all, maybe a personal phone call, just to give me a heads up. We've got an issue that we're watching and we're finding more information about, and so these things can tend to escalate very rapidly. So that'll be certainly in my mind. The next thing in my mind would be, okay, and if it does, what are we going to do about that? So where's the cavalry going to come from? Where are our resources? We need to find exactly where it is, of course. What's our nearest facilities? Factory Wharf's nearby, Cairns is nearby. Instant controller would normally be the RHM of that area. In this particular case, the RHM on leave, it'll either be the deputy or the next RHM down. And we'll be starting to mobilise, well, certainly not so much mobilise, but certainly making phone calls, being ready to mobilise our emergency management teams, which is different from the development infrastructure now, where we keep people on planes and send them up that way. So just be starting to get the ducks in a row.
More money
Ready.
when I was here.
So just being ready for the next steps, I suppose, just checking out what's next. And if it does go next, what am I going to do about that? Where is it going to come
So what part of your thinking now is, and what's the relationship between the actual risk that you're likely to pose and political implications? You've got the barrier reef there. Obviously, it's strategic interest, not only federal government, but it's very much front and centre of the priorities of the current Queensland government.
Spot on. So my mind goes in two ways. One is the operational part I was describing. Second one is then the what ifs. If it does get bigger, we'll be starting our media teams, organised. Team, our media team, which we report through to. I talked to the DG first of all and just give them a heads up. This is the first 20 minutes we're still talking about. So, just a bit of a heads up. We get an incident. It may get bigger. If it does, we're starting to head down that path of media, ministers, on the front foot with the media story, rather than it starting off and getting out of control. I'm conscious that VHF, of course, is people to listen to that, and people start these days with smartphones and other technology to start calling. For some reason they take it upon themselves to call Channel 7 and 9 and other bits and pieces. Don't know why, but there you go. And on social media. So not yet, but that's where the mind's going to. We need to start having a dialogue in that direction, taking charge of that dialogue. So we're driving that bus, not it driving us.
Right, yeah. So now we are 20 minutes into the fire. We're beyond the 20 minutes. We're probably at about 30 minutes. A little bit more is being understood. A manifest has got from the ship's owner to P&I, to their insurer. And you've discovered now in that manifest that out of the 3,500 vessels, 500 are electric vehicles. What are you doing with that information? If you understand that you're the first ones that have been provided with that?
Yeah. So two things. The first thing is that we would be working with the authorities to make sure that that information was with everybody who needed it. So if this was a scenario where us as P&I correspondent lawyers were involved, we would be that sort of point of contact with the ship side to make sure that all information that is on the ship's side that needs to be shared with AMSA and whoever else is involved has that information. And the second thing is we would, if we knew that the fire was escalating, we would start putting in steps to get our own experts on, say, the cause of the fire. So a fire expert who could look at that manifest and locate.
You have a list of experts that you can call on depending on cargo that's being moved on the types of ships?
That's right. So we'll have a list of experts with different types of expertise. They're not necessarily located in Australia. They might be, in Singapore or somewhere else, often from a consultant such as Brooksbell, who has the ability to look at that information and then think about, what's next.
Okay. So, Captain, just going back on to the loading of the vessel, are EVs loaded any differently to your standard combustion engine vehicles?
Yes, EVs are all identified on the plan and they are all loaded in one section of the ship. And they're not spread across wherein you'll have an EE everywhere. And that is highlighted in all the plans as well. So as she said, she gets the manifest in the plan. She'll exactly know where the EVs are located in that 3,500.
Are they high in the loading? Are they low?
The car decks are usually up above. You're talking deck 8 and above, and then it depends on height. As the higher you go, the deck height reduces. So it depends. If it's an SUV, then it is probably at a lower. When I say lower, you're looking at say deck 9 or deck 8. That's still the 9th floor. So or else you're looking. If it's a smaller EV, you're looking at deck 10 or deck 11. But they will all be highlighted as to where it is in the plan.
Okay. Is there any change in the ship firefighting on board or fixed firefighting for EVs as opposed to the others, or it's standard? They're designed for any vehicle that's there.
Standard what we have at the moment is low pressure CO2, fixed CO2, and fixed foam. These are the standard that are there on ships at the moment.
Are they automatic activations or are they a manual activation from?
They're all manual activations.
Okay, so we're 30 minutes into this fire now. The manual activation has gone off. So it's been a CO2 dump on there. So going to EV fires, Mick, you've been to EV fires or lithium ion battery fires. What's peculiar around them compared to a normal car fire that will have X amount of litres of petrol or diesel in the tank?
Yeah, just the ferocity of the fire. It's way bigger, burns longer, burns hotter, and just requires a lot more medium to put out. Which we use water and foam we use, and we have to hit the cell directly. So you can't just put it on. It's got to hit the actual battery cell. Has to be extinguished itself. So
do they burn differently? So we've said we put a CO2. So the whole idea of CO2 is to starve oxygen out of the fire.
Yeah.
How effective is that going to be on a battery fire?
Won't work. So because the battery creates its own oxygen as it's in thermal runaway, it oxidizes. So
what limits the battery fire? So if it's oxidizing, it's self-oxidizing, so it's creating two parts of that triangle. So it's got the heat, it's got the material, and it's also got the oxygen.
Fuel, it's got the fuel with the electrolytes in the cells, the oxygen. And then usually it's a short, electrical short for the spark, or the gases leaving the battery at the rate that they do can cause friction enough to self-combust. So that's how the fire starts, and then it runs away from there.
How big a battery do you need to have a fire that's very hard to contain? Comparing a car battery, which is 3 tons worth of it, to an electric scooter?
Okay, well, hose line won't put out a scooter fire. We can't do it. We actually need to. All we're doing at the moment is grabbing wheelie bins on the side of the road, filling them up and dropping the scooters in. So because they're in the plate of the battery, we can't get to the cells. So.
Okay, so that goes to the fuel. So let's go back to normal combustion engine vehicles. You've got 3,000 on this. How much petrol, diesel is in each of those? Because they're their own fuel source, presumably. They need to be driven on, they need to be driven off. Is it limited?
Yes, so for new cars, we restrict it to 25% of the tank capacity to be able to drive it in and drive it on board. So with 3,000 vehicles, you're estimating about 45,000 or 50,000 liters of fuel in keeping 25% in each tank. So that's the amount of fuel you're talking. If it's only ICE cars with batteries, we restrict the charge to 50% and less. The target is 30%, but we are at 50% at the moment, less than 50%.
What are the challenges? Why don't you just have it at 10%? Why wouldn't you take it down to the lowest that you could? Are there commercial pressures? Are there customer pressures? Are there dealers' pressures to have a higher charge car?
No, it's just the practical reasoning. The voyage, say, between China and Brisbane, you're talking 2 weeks. It needs to last the voyage, and we still do not permit charging on board. So it should have enough battery to, drive it off the ship. So
from a regulator, what sort of considerations are happening with AMSA at the moment? We have car carriers that go across between the mainland and Tasmania. Can you charge on there? People want to drive their electric car presumably fully charged on there. Does that go against what's just happening as best practice?
Best practice is, it's a term that's in play here. So it's all about the risk, and the risk of charging your vehicle. You've got to make sure that the connections are correct. All these things are in place. We don't recommend that you allow charging on Ro-Ro Paxes, but we haven't outright banned it. It's a
So
consideration.
TT Line are just building, they're about to roll out some new vessels.
Yep.
Will they have charging on board?
That's up to them. They don't want to fit them. They've got to comply with the relevant regulations and the charging requirements. There's 2 circulars out about it. So that's up to the operator to decide. We're having a lot of discussions with TT Line now about those vessels, and it's like everything, it's a risk. If you're going to have charging arrangements, what additional firefighting measures and detection measures do you have in place to deal with the risk that presents? And that's the conversation we have with operators at the moment, because the regulations are being outstripped by the technology at the moment. We could say we're going to ban all charging on vehicle vessels. What's the impact on the society of that and the ability to do that? You've got to move the risk then from the vessels onto the wharf, where you have a load of charging points at the port. When it's not firefighting facilities or detection arrangements.
So just in terms, and there's probably a question for both of you at the end, depending on who has the information here. The risk of EV fires comes about presumably through 2 methods, either through an impact normal collision type risk, and the battery, as we saw in there, is compromised and it starts a fire itself, or through through a normal fire that's spread into the EV and then spread into the battery. Is one more likely?
There's multiple sources of it, and they keep on finding more issues of what causes it. So statistically, the highest period where electric vehicles catch fires when they're parked. It's not when they're charging, it's when they're parked. 33% of BEVs catch fire when they're parked. So charging, if you're using an incorrect system or a system that's not been approved, obviously you're going to create a larger risk. Some of the people we've spoken to said, well, you reduce the charge, you've reduced the energy in the battery. The downside of reducing the energy of the battery is that you have more electrolyte, so you produce more gas when it does catch fire. So I don't think we're in a definitive stage where we can say this is the one true path with it. We're very much still in an analysis phase to see what is the best thing. From a risk-based perspective, charging a vehicle on a vessel, instinctively you would say that would raise a risk. Are we going to outright ban it? That's something we've got to consider. But I would say to operators, if you're going to permit charging, how are you managing that risk? What additional protections do you got in place? What additional detection systems have you got in place? Because that's how the society and the industry operates. There are risks in everything that we do. It's how we manage the risks. And are we fully cognizant of what we're doing and the risk that creates? So that's the conversation we're having with TT Line and other operators of Ro-Ro Pax vessels, because this is a societal change that's been driven by environmental considerations. And we can't just say you can't do this, because then that's going to have the impacts of not complying with other government aspirations. So you can't just say no, you've got to say you can, but, and that's the conversation to have with people.
So, thanks for that. You talked around going to scooter fires and electric scooter fires, filling up a wheelie bin, dropping the whole thing in because of, trying to get to the seat of the fire. How hard is it going to get to the seat of that fire, given the battery is the entire undercarriage of the car?
Yeah, well, to get to the EV fires, it has to be fully involved. So basically, so the cells are completely open. Yeah, upholstery's gone. Your batteries are actually completely exposed, and we can put it out. But yeah, until then, it's.
So these are a couple of photos that you took, Mick, or that you?
So I was first responding to both these fires. So this one here, the 7 News one there, we arrived at both those fires within 10 minutes of the initial call, and both photos were taken before we arrived. So this one here, this was an actual, it was deliberately lit. The plug-in hybrids that's lit under the car, under the house with that one. By the time we got there, the garage door had already dropped and was the shape of the car by the time we got there. So
How did you extinguish that?
So that was, our truck has compressed air foam, so it's been around for a while, but works, excellent with any of the.
And that one there, you said it was a hybrid, so it had a combination of fuel from petrol tank as well as the battery. Was the battery on fire as well?
Yes, battery on fire. The fuel, not the fuel. Fuel usually doesn't light up in the tank. It usually stays as it is, but it's not a risk usually for us. So, but the batteries are fully involved with that one. Yeah.
And is most of that from the car itself, or what are we seeing in terms of the intensity of that? Or are we seeing secondary effects of the house starting?
So the black smoke on the left is where the car was parked under the house. So around the front there is, just
that's one hybrid vehicle.
Yeah.
We've now got 500 all, Captain, parked next to each other or all in the same vicinity.
Likely, yeah.
Okay, so we're now moving on. We are, as I said, we're beyond that 20 minutes. More information is known. We know that the initial reports have been confirmed. That there is in fact a fire on board now. We've got one casualty from smoke inhalation from the crew there. JRCC, you now know that all of their Okobar bottles or all of their BA bottles have been exhausted in the first 20 minutes. You've got one casualty. Reports of extreme heat. They still don't know the extent of the fire. Who now is leading in terms of informing government, informing others? Is it a JRCC or is it an MSQ?
JRCC, we would cover the federal side of it. Yeah. And now we're at the stage here where it's a serious fire. You'd form an IMT and they'd be contacting subject matter experts and saying, we've got a car carrier on fire. And the next question would be, are the BEVs on fire? And that would be the critical thing for us to establish. Then once we established if the BEVs were on fire and the fire was out of control, the advice would be to evacuate the crew as soon as possible. And we then communicate with MSQ and say, well, the information we have is it's a BEV fire and it's out of control. We recommend we get the crew off as soon as possible.
Okay, so that's coming from JRCC. We're going back to MSQ. You're obviously getting exactly the same reports here that not only the BA bottles been extinguished that they've got on board, you've got one confirmed casualty from smoke inhalation, a lot of heat, and potentially now from the ship, there's potential loss of steerage, potential loss of power. Is this a next level? Are you doing anything more with this information than what you had when Kel informed the Director General that there was a one-car potential fire?
Yeah, absolutely, Angus. So we've escalated our position, our posture significantly in the last 20 minutes. We've also done two other things. We're looking at this incident in two ways. One, the ship, and two, the environment, because it looks like it'll have to be, the two will run in parallel. We're working closely with MERCOM in AMSA and JRCC. Typically, he may want to take over the ship side of the incident. We may take over the environment side of the incident. Clearly, there's some priorities here. So, you see seals with oil on them and all sorts of things in your TV watching these type of incidents. Number one priority is human life. So we're looking at every possible means to evacuate the ship, the whole ship. We're looking for a place of refuge. And by that, I mean, it's not a port of refuge, it's a place of refuge. There's suitable locations around Cape Fattery to put the ship into the lee of a headland and get a good anchorage and stabilise the situation there. We potentially want the ship into shallow water, Angus, because we don't want the ship to sink in the main channel. It's currently in the main channel. And the other things we're doing, we're ramping up our incident management teams. We're flying up resources to assist in the environment side of the house. And we want boots on the ground. We also want better intelligence. We want those AMSA's aircraft, the Challengers. We want them getting as good situational awareness. And we also want the ETV on site to provide assistance to the fire by way of boundary cooling or whatever else. And we want those things and I believe the ETV is currently in Cairns. So we want
We haven't got the ETV yet.
Okay.
I'm now going to go just to the pilot on board. What's the role of the pilot now? The ship is fighting for its life. It's fighting a fire. You've got a casualty on board. What role does the pilot have in any of that on board response?
I would say the navigation would still be under the con, of course, with advisement to the master. And what we would look to do is be actually the one in charge of the communications, because we are familiar with the shore side. I mean, you may be in a situation where it might be valuable to advise the master, but you stay out of that unless you need to.
Right, yeah, so you're not taking the role in advising how to fight the fire.
That's right.
It's more so the navigational safety of the ship at this stage.
Even you'll be looking at emergency anchorages. Do you want to slow down? What do you want to do?
Okay.
Preparing for that, and yeah.
Right, yeah. And then just going back to MSQ, head of MSQ, Jim spoke around potentially resources. What resources do you already have there? Presumably you're not going to fly pallet loads of things from Brisbane, or are you? Or have you got things closer there that you may need to start thinking about?
Yeah, look, so it'll be, once again, we'll be looking to what's most likely to happen and where it's going to happen. The locality is a big issue. There's now tugs at Cape Reef, so they may all help with boundary cooling and limiting pipeline support. We've got our own vessels, of course, that down the road in Cairns. We've got some equipment in Cairns. We've got more equipment, so we can say activate all that. Our own IMT set up an ICC with the origin things to control. And talking to the AMSA about who's doing what in that space as well. And once again, as you said, the collaborative relationship, the actual working relationship with AMSA will work with that who's doing what pretty quickly. And then from my end, then of course, then briefing up to the command chain, making sure the ministers are now fully briefed, starting to look towards media briefings, getting the front foot with that. What would normally happen pretty rapidly is the minister would operationalise that, which means it's me. And that's fine. And we'll be starting to get that together so that the media part of it doesn't start getting out of control. We may well look at as far as air support. We've got the Challenger aircraft, helicopters, other kinds of firefighting equipment. We may need an exclusion zone for Channel 7 chopper out of Cairns and 9 who want to get up there and take.
So going to that, the fixed or the rotary wing assets that may be available. You don't own them, AMSA owns them. Are you going to request AMSA to put them up at this stage?
Yeah, well, we certainly have a discussion about the best way to handle it, who's doing what.
And AMSA, is there a cost consideration if MSQ were to ask you to put up?
Really here, I think the safety of the crew and getting a very clear picture of what's happening around the vessel that a helicopter would provide or a Challenger would provide would be key. These situations, especially with BEVs, they develop very, very quickly.
Okay, so I'm going to go that safety of the crew. Your captain on board at the moment, you've got 25 crew. They've been fighting a fire for half an hour now. They haven't got control of it. You've no longer got portable air. You've also got one casualty at least. What's your main consideration? Is it safety of the crew? Is it safety of the vessel? If it's safety of the crew, do you want to get everyone off now and just leave the vessel to burn? What are the considerations that you've got going through your head?
100%, in my opinion, looking at how BE fires are, safety of the crew is paramount for me. Saving lives at this stage just takes priority over everything.
Okay, how are you going to explain that to the minister that potentially safety of the crew will override everything else and the vessel potentially will sink in the barrier reef?
Yeah, that's right. So that'll be a discussion straight up. But like all of emergencies, that's always the case. That'll be part of the media dialogue as well. Make sure that's just what we do with the vessel and so on. Stephen, if you want to jump in, mate.
Very much so. So probably part of the conversation advice we've given the JRCC is that due to the nature of these fires, they go to their maximum potential very, very quickly. They're very intense and they're very difficult to put out. And it will get to a stage where the vapor from the fire will be highly toxic and highly explosive, and the crew will be in greater danger. And it will be a position where they might not be able to abandon ship and might not be able to get out of the accommodation because of toxic vapors and things like this. So it is essential to get the crew off as soon as possible. The nature of car carriers and their design, the two mooring stations, you have to travel through the vehicle decks to get to them. Yeah, so those vehicle decks on 10 and 11 are on fire. That's basically below the accommodation. So it would be very difficult for the crew to get to a mooring station, to put out a line to assist us in, oh God, I don't know what's that.
So this is just showing how challenging it can be getting a crew off, because we've just spoken around potentially getting a crew off here. It's not straightforward. Car carriers, what sort of, from that top deck there, Captain, what's the freeboard there?
You're looking at over 25, 30 meters when it comes to a car carrier. So that's probably a loaded tanker, which is
Even easier.
be 1/3 of what freeboard would be on a loaded carrier. So,
Smoke too on top
yeah,
of all that.
you'll have.
So just going to that safety of the crew being paramount over fighting the fire, how does fire and rescue deal with that? Presumably it's safer to stand back and let things burn, but you don't. You go in and put them out. So what's the consideration around the human life and the risk to someone putting out a fire to what is just a house or just a car?
Okay, so yeah, it's life first. So we risk a lot to save life and risk hardly anything for property. So that's basically how we work. So so it's paramount. The crew's safety would be paramount then in this case, yeah.
Okay, so we're still at this stage where those considerations are happening and Kel is speaking with the Director General and with the Minister. There's obviously the Environment Minister who's very concerned at the moment, and you've got multiple environment and action groups and Garumpa and the rest who are now making their concerns very well known and demanding that the ship be taken out of the reef and be let on its own, on the outside of the reef. Jim, is it realistic to be able to get a ship that's like this, that's on fire, out and away from the reef?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But first of all, we'd have to do a risk assessment. There's a number of openings through the reef to get to the Coral Sea. 1 mile opening comes to mind around Cape Flattery. So we do a risk assessment of the ship. Because if we haven't got a confidence that the ship's going to make it outside of the Coral Sea, we'll effectively scuttle it in the Coral Sea. I think it's better to leave it inside and possibly.
And just going to you, Stefanie, are you concerned that there's discussions now around writing off the entire cargo and the ship in the first half hour?
Yes, but I don't think that they would be primary considerations while the master and crew were at severe risk of injury or death. So obviously that would be something we'd have in the back of our minds. But the order of things would be we need to deal with the emergency scenario first.
Okay, so as a reef pilot, how concerned you are that you're going to be kept on the ship for even longer while all these discussions are taking place? Do you want to get off?
I would say that the statement made is the master has overriding authority. So all this other discussion is in the background. He's the one who has to take the call.
It is, excepting you're standing on the bridge of the ship.
Yeah.
And you're not getting off it anytime soon until others get off it. Is there anything that you're going back to your masters around, get me off this ship? I don't get paid nearly enough.
Flash up that chopper.
Getting off the ship would be the same for the crew and me, so.
Come on, Barry, what are you doing?
It'd be high risk to take the ship outside the reef would be stupidity.
Right.
Yeah, for the first instance, you take it away from any shore-based resources. Secondly, there's a reef opening right opposite Cape Flattery. All the reef openings north of Cairns, none of them are lit. You take the ship outside the reef, there's a fair chance the engines are going to become disabled. The prevailing winds, as you've already said, are from the southeast. You take it outside the reef, it loses its engines, it blows up onto the outer edge of the reef.
So what are concerns have you got, given that one of your employees is on that vessel now as the duty of care and as in your position? Is there anything that you're advocating? Who are you speaking to?
We go to the law books and just make sure that it hasn't changed, that it's pilot's advice, master's orders. We've got no liability.
Not for the ship. How about for the family of your pilot? Okay, so I'm just going to touch on, before I go into so I've got tug skipper here in the audience.
Yes.
How feasible is it to get a line on something that's burning like this? Now, it's not, it's not too bad at this stage.
A car carrier is probably one of the unique vessels that's actually got sunken bits on it, and most car carriers have got them on their stern. So that could be done with the gear that we deck out our ETVs with, as well as what the Coral Knight's also got, your level 1 ETV. They could make the connection themselves, potentially.
And what sort of protections do you have inside the tug if you've got exactly what we said there around toxic fumes coming out?
Well, if he's sitting at anchor in a reef, I'd imagine he'll be windrow, which means all the smoke will be going out the stern, which is where you're trying to connect, which would be a problem in itself.
A problem that you wouldn't do it, or you have BA, or you have a bridge that can be sealed?
We haven't got monitoring gear or anything like that. It would be impractical to have a vessel that size fully encapsulated to be able to monitor the air.
Okay, so this, as this is unfolding, those considerations around potentially taking it out are taking place at the moment, putting the line on it. So they've gone to Switzer, you're in the Port of Flattery at the moment. What type of preparations would you be making? Any as apart from that you would normally do? Is there any other considerations opposed from just a normal tug?
Well, getting the vessel mobilised, there's an ATV based in Cairns, one of the Switzer tugs. Getting it mobilised.
How long does that take?
2 hours.
2 hours from call out.
Just to add on to that, the ETC for Cairns is the tug's based in Maria. So that's a further mobilisation time up the coast. The 2 tugs in Cairns are tractor tugs. They could only go and provide a line over the bow.
And they would be 2 hours to sail or
To sail,
plus how long to get the 120 nautical miles from Cairns to there?
12 hours.
12 hours. Okay, so we're still only in the first half hour at this stage.
AMSA has got a new contract out and expected to start, I think, in the middle of next year for an ATV, emergency towage vessel. And that will, the current vessel probably hasn't got enough grunt, so that should be replaced by about the middle of next year.
So in terms of that for AMSA, we know that there's going to be a call out time by the time that you actually initiate, whether it's an ETV, whether it's a harbour tug, whatever it is, there is a delay period. Are you already initiating it at this point or are you still waiting for more information?
I think at this stage, due to the complexity of the fire and the risk it presents, and the location of the casualty, we would be activating ETC and ETV straight away. It's one of these situations where we would seek to get a line on it however we could due to where its location, and it's better to have the vessels handy nearby where we can make a decision however fluid it develops, then go, oh no, we might need that tug.
What's the commercial considerations when you call on ETV?
50 grand up front plus 50 grand a day, I think. It's
Okay, so you
material.
make that call in the first half hour and
As Mercom, if I was Mercom and there was a car carrier on fire with BVs and that crew in the Barrier Reef, I would make that call straight away because, as Jim pointed out, you will always get criticised for not doing something, and it's better to activate as soon as you can. There is well demonstrated inertia in responses. We go, oh no, we're not going to activate that now. By then it's too late. This is one of our worst nightmares, a car carrier on fire in the Barrier Reef. And you will be throwing everything we had at that.
okay, we're back on the ship at the moment. As a captain, we've talked around potentially taking it out of the reef and some of the complications there. There's obviously potentially going into a port, and Jim spoke around ports of refuge or places of refuge, or anchor. Where do you want the ship?
So, like I said, with BEV in question, it's definitely a special case. You're talking about fires burning at over 1,000 degrees. And you talk about our bulkheads and stuff. You say A30, A60, you're looking at 180 degrees and 250 degrees. So you're looking at 4 times the heat. So for me, as you know, the priority would still be getting, you know, the time is going to be so tight. And even with the fixed firefighting equipment that we have on board, we can only have one shot at it. It's not that, you know, you can keep going at it at multiple places. So I would still preference given to, you know, saving lives on board. And if that means, you know, you head it out in a certain direction that is away from the coast, so be it, or you're looking at contingency anchoring. But then again, like he said, to reach the anchor stations, you would have to make way through the accommodation. And with a burning ship, you would really want to do that. I don't think there'll be many
engineers to get out the engine room. They've got to get in a lift that goes up through the vehicle decks that are on fire. So they might be coming up the back stairs.
Absolutely.
And it's, you know, how long are the engineers going to stay down the engine room?
Okay, so you just
But one issue which hasn't been touched upon, because on the car carrier, I'd say master, equally important issue to fire is stability. You're talking about putting water and foam and all. I mean, you might sink the ship before you fought for the fire. Because the GM is less than 1 meter most often.
very good point. So which brings us now to we're 40 minutes in. We've been fighting, you've had the fire mains on, you've been fighting it, you've obviously extinguished all your fixed firefighting. What's the sort of capacity of your fire main system to continually go for 40 minutes or so? How much water?
So
How much
you're looking
waste
at,
you added?
say, an average of 250 cubics an hour, and as rightly said, we did have the free surface moments in question, but that was to be touched upon at a later stage. And ships really are pretty much dependent on the eductor system, which is at probably 50 cubics. So that's not really taking out the water at the same speed that it is going in. So if we're looking at 250 cubics, that's the water that's still going in. And as he rightly put, that car carriers have a very low GM, so very susceptible to, going through a stability scenario where we have an even bigger challenge to tackle.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, it's 40 minutes in. We still doing 16 knots or 18 knots?
So at this stage, we've just proceeded to anchor. So despite the challenges of actually going to anchor, the ship has gone to anchor, so it is now stationary. We are now looking at 6 hours after the initial reports. Vessels at anchor. So in that 6 hours, and touching on your point, you said you've got 2 pumps have been running at 300 cubics an hour, almost for 6 hours straight. So where is that water now? You've got a 6 degree list, and all of the lashings have been burnt on your vessels as well. What other considerations, free surface and movement of cargo, are you thinking about as captain?
Yeah, so basically you're at anchor. So when you have such a situation where you're on a low GM vessel, you're bound to list, and there are some incidences where the ship is listed probably 60 degrees on one side, and then you have your watertight doors that are way below the deck. So it's definitely an increased risk that you're posing when you're at anchor, and we've seen that happen very often with car carriers, especially when you've seen, with the ballast exchange and everything. So it is.
That'd be another reason you wouldn't take the ship outside the reef. That Glenn's just reminded me that MARPOL car carrier that caught fire in the Western Indian Ocean there. I think that capsized.
Absolutely. So you've now got this fire that's burned for 6 hours at the degree, what, sort of well over 1,000 degrees?
Yeah, 1,000, yeah.
So what does 1,000 degree for that length of time do to the metal framework of the ship? What's the ship's bulkhead, or what? Firstly, from the captain, what are the ship's?
Oh, I was working on steel, but being alloys,
some of the vehicle decks are made of aluminium, especially the higher up ones.
Yeah.
And they've got holes in them for the lashing points.
Yeah.
So they're not a continuous structure.
Structure.
Your car carrier doesn't have subdivision.
No.
It could be one like a barge.
No.
Even the decks you're talking about, they are movable. And they're sectionally movable. So you might have one section this way and one above, so there's a gap in between. So there is no subdivision. It's like one barge.
You have like weathertight zones. So a ship with 12 decks will be in 4 weathertight zones, wherein say 10 to 13 will be one weathertight zone, and then you will have 8 to 10 as one, 5 to 8 in one zone, and at 1,000 degrees. What I've read online is before 2014 they were at A0 rating, and after 2014 you're talking A30 and A60, which is again 250 degrees or 300 degrees. So at 1,000 degrees, I've seen pictures online where you pretty much got molten metal lying on that deck and everything is burnt out. You really don't have anything left.
Angus,
Yes.
would the Navy have a patrol craft up there? Would they have been installed at any time?
Okay, so I'll go to Kel Dillon. There's what's in place for requesting defence assistance in any type of emergency, and how likely are defence to come to the party, and what sort of capability can defence bring?
Yeah, look, so the answer to the first part of the question, what capability, what process? There's a process called Defence Civil Community, DAC, as a name's changed, but it's used to be called. And we utilised that last year to great effect in the floods one, for example. Defence is always very, open ears and always wants to be collaborative, like our friends at AMSA. I'm not sure what I've been based in Cairns twice myself with patrol boats, and what they could add to the party I'm convinced about, particularly for firefighting capacity, particularly when I'd be up there to we'd be having that discussion the first 10 minutes to off the covers.
Let's get away from Yorkie's novel. Let's get it down there.
Exactly right. maybe they have limited firefighting capacity in that role and expertise in sort of area, so I probably wouldn't be doing it. The only thing about that though is air support possibly. With Army, he's got things in the background if they needed to be the very heavy equipment for QFS, if they needed to deploy equipment out there, for example, if that came to the fore.
Air support for aerial bombardment or for moving logistics?
Logistics and people.
Okay.
But that's decided, that's a bubble at the moment, a thought bubble. If you needed to get a particular part, you needed that air support quickly and effectively, you may well be getting a part, but it's not my first choice.
Okay.
No, I quite agree. The patrol boats wouldn't have any firefighting, but it's more to pick up survivors.
Okay, so that's a good point. So we now are looking at 6 hours into it. Obviously, there's considerations around continuing to pour water onto it. Just from fire and rescue, what sort of advice are you giving? You've got now the political tensions have increased considerably because you're now into that news cycle. You've got a ship that's been burning for 6 hours. It hasn't moved. It's at anchor at the moment. It's right in the middle of the Barrier Reef. They're going to head of fire and rescue or head of Queensland Fire. What do you do when you've got a car carrier, a multi-storey car park with 500 EVs on? Is there any advice?
Is the crew off, so that'd be the first, and with like rotary wing, we may have had some our department go around and check it out, but out there on its own, like the ship's basically on its own, like it's got to get on top of this fire, or with having the tugs there too, like to
Okay, so you've got the tugs are there now because we're 6 hours into it. They were activated, within the first 40 minutes or so. What are they doing? We've got the crew off. We've got all non-essential personnel off. So there's a couple of crew. I think you've got the master still on. You've got the chief engineer still on. Maybe one or two others. What are the tugs doing?
We'd be looking to see how we can get a sustainable light on it. We'd be having serious discussions with the master, like we alluded to. Designer car carriers, the crew would be having to go through the vehicle decks to get to the mooring stations. Sunken bits is an opportunity. If they've got an anchor down, that's great. We can cobble together and Heath Robertson something on an anchor cable. You can do that. You can pull in a bit of slack, gas axe, a link out, and connect up to that and use it as a tow point. That's where we would focus on it.
J-hook the anchor cable.
J-hook the anchor cable, whatever.
You need personnel on board to do that.
Not on board. We can do that from the vessel, from the Coral Knight can do that. Put a stopper on a chain, whatever. There's a way of doing it. We can work that out on the fly. Just get down there. Our experience there, especially there, you see the Fremantle Highway. It's not gas, it's vapor, and 30 to 50% of that's hydrogen. Yeah, the deck's deflected up 2.5 meters from a gas explosion. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you there. So we've now got obviously environmental or toxic hazards here.
Yeah.
Just in terms of when you fight fires, EV, lithium-ion batteries, what's the sludge of that? Is there any considerations of the water mixed with whatever has been burnt? Is that any more toxic than anything else?
It is, yeah. Never use it first. It's about getting on top of the fire, and that's sort of secondary environmental impact. That's when we start to check that out. But yeah, it's basically a hazmat EV.
And how much of that, Captain, is gone into the Barrier Reef, and how much is contained within the ship that you've been going for 300 cubes a meter for
250 cubes an hour? See, in practicality, you're talking molten metal. So, those scuppers are the ones that are going to drain it. And if you're talking molten metal, all the more reason those scuppers have already been clogged in, and there's practically nothing going down. And it's
okay. So we've now got that pouring into the Barrier Reef, which is making the 6 o'clock news, and there's demands for more to be done. What do we have there from an MSQ point of view in terms of environmental sensitivities? What document is that contained in? Is there anything? Is all the reef considered the same, or different parts of the reef have different sensitivities?
Okay, so Angus, we would be engaging high-level officials from both the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, Department of Environment, and others. We have a thing called re-environment high-risk areas, which the whole inner route north of Cairns is. So that's high-value environmental areas. I'm also reminded of the net environmental benefit assessment, which is, I think, what we're all talking about here now, NEBA. So Perry Sutton has convinced the bureaucrats not to take it out to the Coral Sea, like the Iron Barrow. Well done, Perry. We've got to tow this thing somewhere, okay? So we have to take it somewhere, because I think the ship's going to be disabled very shortly. I don't see any point towing it south. It's a long way to Cairns. There's a few good anchorages around there. I think it could be a permanent fixture for a while. And so we need to start thinking about that. But to talk about those conversations, Angus, as you know, at environmental higher levels with the greenies and everyone else, no disrespect, you know, we're looking for fast decision making. We're just about slow decision making right back. But in all seriousness, I think we need to be looking for a location in situ there. We shouldn't be towing it to Cairns or anywhere else. It's not going to make it. It could end up in a worse spot.
Okay, so we just go back to
this trip at Cape Flattery. So if you're going to fly in the fire brigade, park it behind Low Isles, and you'll be able to.
No, you have an anchors there, which we use for Cape Flattery ADA. It's just it's on that.
Yeah, that's very important because
it's got a
with the shed
facility.
Yep.
Silica sand.
What's that, boy?
Yeah, well, I think from my experience with the Shen Ning, when she started to break herself up on the reef and we had to get her off and put her somewhere, one of the major arguments we had was where we as mariners wanted to put the ship and where the environmental people said we had to put the ship.
Yeah.
And that was quite a complicated conversation. We had to take it. We end up putting the ship somewhere where we didn't want it to be.
because we're now going to the pressure that was. Forget about the environmental side. We're just going to switch back to the commercial reality. So you're now staring at the complete loss of the hull and all the cargo on board. How significant is that in your portfolio, in a worldwide portfolio, or is it just a drop in the bucket?
Well, it's 6 hours in, I suppose, and our main priority is to assist the authorities. Although we are aware that, you know, that this is a total loss, or it's looking like a total loss. There would be a notification internally within the club. We would probably wait for when there would be a decision on when it becomes a constructed total loss to I suppose, publicise that. There would be media coverage anyway, and our main concern at this stage would be the possibility of an oil spill or a bunker oil spill, because the claims that would come out of something like that would be enormous and potentially enormous, and that may affect the industry.
Okay, so Kel Dillon, you work for the state government. It's not an unlimited funding source. Decisions you make potentially have cost implications to them. What are you doing from the beginning of this in terms of being cognizant of costs? Every time you decide to do something that comes at a cost to MSQ, notwithstanding AMSA's cost, is it being captured? Do you care about it? Do you have any responsibility at all to manage it?
Yes, no. We've got a new system in place called Guardian, which is our incident management control system. It is really very good at recording.
This is another better system since I left.
Better system. But it's a very good system to capture. It's critical, as a lot of people here would know, about the record keeping and all the decisions that get made, reported properly, the costs that are incurred. And those other supporting activities are all captured. Our colleagues in AMSA, of course, and I heard this before, Stephen, I heard the word Maritime, and I'm thinking the same thing as well, because they have different powers that must also that may well be handy, particularly from a direction perspective, because it triggers different outcomes, and we get that. So they're the conversation we'll be having without going into those detail now, about where it would go and how. I tend to agree with Jim about what we're doing with it now. Their options become really off, for example, or pretty much off. You don't want this thing up on a reef, breaking up a reef. Put it somewhere in situ where it's outside the main channel and reasonable depth of water, where services can be provided, and sit back and try and do what we can to contain it as much as possible from there. But I think the options you look at that there, exactly right. That's what's going on inside.
So this is the last shot that we've got from the AMSA flight there. They've gone to fire and rescue to us, and what are we seeing here? Is this just a standard fire in a ship? Or is this something more significant?
Yeah, that's looks end to end, and across the whole ship. So that's pretty significant. Yeah. So
Angus, just from a towage perspective as well, we would have some concerns. We're working for AMSA at this stage. If we've deployed an ETC out of far north Queensland, we'd have some concerns about safely getting our people close to an intense fire like that.
Yeah.
As far as we don't have any firefighting equipment, we don't have any thermal or vapour equipment on board. So in the absence of not having probably Queensland Fire and Rescue jump on with us as we depart, we've probably got some concerns getting up close to that one to attach to move it anywhere.
Right, how many people have you got on your tug? So if you've activated everything you can, the ETV plus the two ETCs,
Yeah.
how many, so it's 3 vessels, how many staff
So
are out there at the moment?
get on the ETV, and I think the ETC contract's 8, isn't it?
We'd go with close to 10. out of
Close to
10.
10, yeah.
But 2 tugs of battery as well, 2 tugs of fluttery, 30-ton bollard.
Okay, so how long can you stay out there? You've been deployed, you've got the 2 hours notice to get ready and sail.
Yeah, so it's mostly getting the bodies on board and the food, and we go with probably 4 or 5 days worth of food, plenty of fuel and enough bodies to run 24/7 on the tug and boundary cool.
So just going back, how long is it going to take you to get there from activation?
12 hours.
Yeah, a couple
12 hours, so you're
couple of
still-
hours to provision the asset and get away within 2. The actual contract's 4 out of.
Yeah, it's
but
4,
we'll
yeah.
Get away within 2 or 3. And then we've got about an 8 or 10 hour transit up there.
Okay, so you're still not there at this point. So remember, we're still 6 hours or so, 8 hours after coming into the 6 o'clock news. Obviously considerable pressure. All of this is on the news at the moment. All the news can say is that AMSA still haven't responded to it. The tugs are still 6 hours away. We need to have better capability in the reef, and that news cycle is going to run its own course. MSQ, it's you're the ones that look within this 3 nautical miles here. Your minister is saying, or the government, in fact, is saying this is not to break up on the barrier reef. Where do you want it? If that's in the consideration, are you looking at trying to move it, or are you simply pushing back and saying we can't touch it?
Look, so I tend to agree. I would be taking us off the reef with the resources you've got. You haven't got the tugs anyway. The tugs from Cape Flattery provide some good support. I'd be putting it as much as possible.
It's at anchor at the moment. You've got 3 people on board still. I don't know, in some pocket up the front. You've still got the pilot on board and
Dennis Disco.
the first engineer.
Stop yourself and then go get the rest of the people off. Get limited firefighting support you can do in there and just contain it as much as you can. And we're starting to look towards deployment of our equipment up there. Because, you know, the next steps are going to be ugly. That thing burns to the water.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the equipment in a moment.
Yeah, I'm just trying to ascertain where the captain and the pilot put that anchor down. Was it on the course coming south? And still on the force line, or is he sheared off to try and get a bit closer inshore?
Okay, so
Before we move it again, where's he actually anchored?
pretty much in the channel, just to the side of the channel in 15 metres of water.
But,
So that's where it sits. There's not enough people on board now to move it anyway. You've only got very limited on there. Okay, so we'll. The crew have been airlifted off. The crew have been airlifted off. We're down to what they would assume is minimal manning, which is really just essential personnel.
All right, yeah.
Depends whether the captain was from the coast of Cambodia. He would be.
after you, sir.
So this is a shot at the moment. The tugs still aren't there, but you can see what's coming out and the types of potentially toxic fumes there at the moment. Toxic fumes there of any concern once you've got crew off? The tugs are still 6 hours away.
They are a concern. You'd put a marine notice out or something to tell people to stay away from it. If they're stupid enough to go near it, then.
Okay, that just goes to that point. Let me continue. The busy shipping channel, how many ships go up and down that channel?
About 30 a day.
30 a day. So what are you doing to the rest of that shipping that keeps Australia going?
Okay, we're going to put an exclusion zone around that ship casually. I don't know, we have to look at the chart, but we've probably still got a 2-way route that we can get through there. But with this toxic plume, I think I'd think about closing that inner route for a while, because that looks very, very nasty. We'd get some professionals in, like Department of Environment, to give us some intel on those fumes? What exactly is the harm to be caused? We'd possibly just close the inner route in company with AMSA for possibly 4 to 6 hours, depending on how it goes, I think, Angus.
Okay, so we're now,
When does the P&I Club and salvage get involved?
we'll get to that one. So now, obviously, the ship has been there. It's been 24 hours at the moment. So the ETV are there, but not being able to fight the fire. The fire is still burning uncontrollably on board the vessel. Everyone is off the vessel at this point in time because we've seen that heat plume there at the Tug's doing anything at this stage?
Well, can do boundary cooling, but I mean, not there yet.
24 hours they should be.
Well, but potentially then if there is still an anchor, let's say you have been managed to J-hook an anchor. Well, the smartest is to pull this thing into the shallowest water you can and sit on the bottom.
Correct.
Because it will roll over if you keep on punching water. Even if you're boundary cooling on the outside, you are probably going to punch through the side of the hole and end up really giving it 12,000 litres a minute.
Okay, so that consideration, taking it into shallower water for it, if it's going to go down, that's at odds with what the government's telling you, Kel, is that we don't want this thing breaking apart on the reef. How do you reconcile between limiting the damage, knowing it's still burning, and making a conscious decision that will mean that it'll break up on the reef?
Yeah, so look, so that it's a longer answer that I can give you in 10 seconds, but that'll have to be a conversation with government to point out the expert advice that we have and what we recommend, and we'll find some compromise where either they accept that advice or we work out a way of getting around achieving the outcomes as best we can.
Well, at this stage, salvage and P&I will be involved, and it's going to be a much cheaper option for P&I long term for that thing to be sitting on the bottom where you can work on it rather than sitting in about 25 minutes.
The big issue.
Play their part.
Okay, so that goes to P&I. How much influence do you think you'll have over the Australian government to have a cheaper option outcome for you as opposed to their protection of the barrier reef?
Very little, I think. Look, there are scenarios, and this is something that we experienced with the Express Pearl matter that we were working on, where there was a imminent and massive threat to an environmentally sensitive area, and this was in the Port of Colombo. And despite what the government was telling the P&I Club was still insistent that we wanted to do it a particular way because of commercial considerations. So it's surprisingly difficult to get a P&I Club and owners over the line with environmental management and actually abiding by what the authorities say when those commercial considerations come into play. So our role really would be saying, look, if you're not going to cooperate, you're going to receive a direction. And it's better to cooperate in this situation.
Okay, so we've got a situation here where there is multiple voices at the table from Salvers and Svitzer telling us that it is probably safer and more cost effective to put this into shallower water and probably
fuel when it's sitting above the water. It's easy to get the fuel off. That's where your big.
And there'll be other considerations. You've got a government saying that we're not going to have this breakdown on the reef. We've only just got a reprieve from the on our status of the reef at the moment. They're not going to undo that by letting the ship sit there. You've got AMSA, who have got their tugs there through the contract that are providing boundary cooling, which appear to be somewhat successful in knocking down part of the fire and reducing the heat. You got something else?
Yeah, so there's going to be some conversations about this, Angus, and the guy from Svitzer, sorry, I don't know your name. I reckon you're spot on. I would definitely be grounding the vessel because it stabilises and controls the environment. That will be a big decision though, particularly like if it's burning like that. So that will be a high level decision with the Premier, Kel, Minister. The person who should activate this is MARPOL. He has powers of intervention. And I think that's we should pass the ball straight to MARPOL.
Straight to me.
Because he has those powers for exactly this.
Okay, so let's go to the MARPOL powers. Who is the MARPOL? What gives MARPOL the powers, and who is MARPOL accountable to in exercising those powers?
So the MARPOL's accountable to the minister. That's it. So these are power intervention to prevent the words polluting. So you can direct or you can take actions or direct agencies or persons to take actions to prevent environmental damage. There's a lot of different factors in play here, and beaching the vessel or grounding the vessel, the big concern I have is all those lithium iron oxides inside there. You don't know what's happened, if decks collapsed or whatever. So if you take that down to the waterline, got all these lithium iron oxides and God knows what that's come out of those batteries that will be in the reef, and that will cause an enormous amount of damage. You could probably localize that, but that would be the concern. The way I would do this is I would use the tugs. We'd give instructions to the tug crews not to try and punch through the hull and try and cool down what we can remotely. Maybe the fire will stabilise, maybe it'll burn for 3 or 4 days. It won't be very nice, but putting the vessel on the bottom, I would be concerned about all those oxides from the batteries coming out, uncontrolled into the ocean, into the barrier reef, and no one's going to thank you for that.
Absolutely. Yes, Capt.
I tend to agree. And so what I'd be doing, we'd be having this discussion.
I'll be going.
But I'd be heading for mud flat.
So what your head for?
A mud flat source
Yeah.
before I bed.
It'd be a discussion.
Find a stable low. I wouldn't actually necessarily go for the grounding in the first instance, but I'll be prepared for it. So I could put it somewhere where you're looking, of course, for the winds from the southeast, somewhere where you're going to travel on the sand of the mud. I'll probably have it in water deep enough where you could try and bound the cord, hope the fire extinguishes itself and then you don't break the hull up. But if you had to, put it on a flat bottom rather than a reef. And also with the southeast, with all your chemicals, things pushing up the sand flats and sand, which they can be cleaned up better than they can be through a reef.
Yeah, try and put in about 5 or 6 metres of water. Keep the main deck above the water level because that's where all the iron oxides are going to come out.
We've got really worse, you could drag it up with the outdoor.
Yeah.
We've got to remember also, we've probably got 2,000 tonnes of heavy fuel or bunkers on board at the moment. We haven't spoken about that.
Okay.
And
So
if
for that
it's burn out, too, a lot of those toxins have been burnt off into the atmosphere too, so a lot of them aren't.
After 24 hours or so of burning?
If it's burned, yeah.
How long is an EV fire likely to last for if it's attacked?
Sort of 3 to 5 hours on its own, one EV.
Okay. How long can ship fires go for? Let's look at one that occurred down in Port Kembla. How long can a fire burn for once it gets through the trunking of a ship and throughout the engine spaces?
Bulk ship, but I'm for 6 days.
Okay. So it's not just obviously the fuel on board, there are other considerations when it burns, yes?
So we have an owner here who's getting advice from his sailboats to beach it. And we've got the authorities who don't want it beached. So is Mercon now going to come in and direct?
Which goes us to the next point is that's exactly what's just occurred. So Mercon, because of their considerations of all of the risks or because of the political pressure or because a combination of all of those things has given a direction that the ship is to go into Cape Flattery. And we have determined that it is feasible, it is safe enough, and Svitzer have said that we believe on assessment here, it is safe for us to be able to get it into Cape Flattery. So the next thing is, what does that mean to you, MSQ, that Mercom has now given that direction in terms of you opening up Cape Flattery? Do you oppose it?
In this scenario, probably not. I mean, we'll be, you know, there's nuances within that. But, you know, obviously Mercom was got that conclusion by working together in the first place. You know, as far as opposing it, no, generically. But any concerns we would have about managing that and how we manage state asset, you know, what does it mean for the asset? You talk about the wharf itself or actually the.
Okay, so let's go to that. Jim, what happens in Cape Flattery?
It's a silica sand export port. It's probably the best silica sand in the world. There's probably one ship every week. It's also a big employer of the local Indigenous community. And that's a group we haven't spoken of yet as well, because they are effectively the tribal owners of the whole place. So there's probably a few conversations have to go on at that local level as well, Angus.
So how many berths are there?
Just one.
Just one.
Yeah. And
so it is the day before the silica sand vessel was to come in.
Yep.
And you've now been told that that's going to come in there. That obviously has implications for that particular operation. Who owns the cost? Is that you that owns the cost? Mercom has given a direction to go in against your wishes and against your advice?
If it's a public port and the ship was directed to, you know, be towed there as a port of refuge, I would say that for the costs of the port itself, that would not necessarily come back to the ship's owner because of the public, the overriding public duty of the port itself. As for other commercial operators in the port, so other ships coming in or the sand barge, that would be a matter for settling like demurrage claims amongst the ship owners and the shipping interests themselves between each other, not involving the port itself.
Right. Jim,
You're not putting it on the wall. You're going around the wall into the bay, aren't you?
That's what I,
putting it,
yeah, definitely.
it's been directed.
Definitely wasn't talking about the wall, the wharf, William, talking about the anchorage northwest of the wharf. Yeah.
Okay, so the decision has been,
Yeah.
it's to go alongside the wharf. Because at the anchorage, if it sinks at the anchorage, because of everything that's on board, and you've just made that very good point around the local traditional owners there and have a very strong attachment to that waterway, the government has directed you through MARPOL to do everything to actually get everything off the vessel to minimise any environmental impacts, and that is, it's no longer a safety impact because everyone is off the vessel. It's no longer a commercial impact because the government's directed it. It is simply around getting everything off the vessel. You've put it alongside the wharf, or what is the, just going to that point?
Once again, we'd have to do
alongside.
Well, we'd have to do a risk assessment. It could potentially harm the wharf, which is a very expensive one.
There's another consideration, and that's the Cape Flattery community.
Yeah.
Lives to the northwest of where.
We'll get to that point.
Good point.
Very
Steve.
good.
So that could potentially have a long-term adverse impact for the operation, because that's the sole
Commercial
operation.
consideration,
Yeah,
not a
commercial.
safety.
Commercial and a little bit of safety as well. I think just bringing it alongside there, Angus, putting it at anchorage, which is sandy bottom just to the northwest of the anchorage, the wharf, is I think the best proposition.
But what's the point of putting it alongside the wharf at Cape Flattery? That wharf is useless for that type of ship. You can't get any gear on it.
Yeah, no.
You're off it.
No, I agree, Mike, but once the whole ship's dead, so to speak, and it's just the fire's out.
The next strong wind warning comes through.
Sorry?
Yeah, next bit of swell, it's gonna be hell on that wall.
That goes to a good point. What's the sort of holding capacity? So what do you need when you come alongside with a vessel of that sort of windage in terms of holding capacity?
You're looking like whole bollard full of what, 60 tons?
Okay, so what's Cape Flattery capable of in the bollards there? Jim?
Yeah, about 40.
Okay.
Boring winches are gonna work. Yeah. We just got power to a car ship that had a fire.
I wouldn't go near the wharf, Angus.
The beach just to the northwest of that, of the Cape Flattery jetty is gently shelving.
Yeah, sandy.
So you just gently run the ship.
Yeah, I agree, Stephen. It's a sandy bottom.
And it's sandy.
So the other consideration you've got here is you've got 11 metres of draft now. What does that do? You're bringing it inside. What's 11 metres of draft going to do to your plan to bring it in?
That's fine.
That's fine.
No problem. You might have to use the tide, but in the next 4 to 6 hours, not a problem.
Angus, there's another point. Long time ago, the minister overrode MARPOL, insisted something else happened to the ship, which wasn't advisable at all. UK changed their laws, so it can't be directed. In Australia, we never got around to it.
No, I don't think we did.
So just assume the minister says that's by our electorate, take it somewhere else. What's MARPOL going to do?
You can't argue with the minister. I think it's direct.
It's a very good point. So regardless of the mariner skill set and the fire and rescue skill set, there will be multiple considerations. And Jim touched on it. You've also got the Indigenous community and their attachment to the land, and they will certainly, particularly in Queensland and in other states, will have a very big seat at the table. You've got Australia's commitment to maintaining the barrier reef that sits in the background, which I can assure you will ride well above the safety of this ship and any of the crew and cargo on board. So they're exactly the discussion that we're having now. So we've now got the ship, it's 5 days, the fire is out. This is really what they're seeing inside the vessel. So that's obviously, well, who knows whether it's one of the upper decks or lower decks there. We now have debris washing up because of fighting the fire. And because of the sludge of the water and everything else that's gone into, that's starting to now impact along the coastline. Now, there is a national call for volunteers to come and assist with that cleanup operation. What's the consideration? So who's in charge of the cleanup first? Is it AMSA or is it MSQ?
Well, it's actually the shoreline cleanup is managed by the local council, believe it or not. So the local council is responsible for the shoreline cleanup, but AMSA and MSQ would both assist. We would deploy significant numbers on the beaches to clean up the debris and the oil. We'd also work very closely with the Indigenous communities because they would be a key player in this, and we'd take on their advice. That's exactly what we did with Pacific Adventure back in 2009 on the eastern side of Moreton Island. And the other thing I think we've got to think about, Angus, longer term is we've got to get this 2,000 tonne of heavy fuel oil off the ship. And that is
Is that going to be easier done on a mud bank or alongside a wharf?
Like that, well, 6 to 1.5 dozen others.
Depends on how big the bunker barge is.
Yeah.
A key consideration of the shoreline cleanup is information to the volunteers, whoever's doing it, about the hazards of the oxides and everything that's come out of here.
Okay, so
the toxicity
Tour is 2.5 miles off the beach in Flattery.
So
So the ship's going to be anchored a fair way out if she's drawing 11 metres. She's going to ground a long way out.
unless it comes in through the channel.
No, I mean, that's not Bay, the northwest of Cape Flattery.
Yeah.
10 metre contour is 2.5 miles off the.
Right.
Yeah, I had a look at that.
So is it going to get in there?
We get 1.5, 2 metres high.
And again, I guess that's probably one of the considerations as to where it goes. But just in and going to you now, Kel, the cleanup is sitting within MSQ at the moment. Volunteers.
Yep.
Are you going to use volunteers? What are the risks or the rewards?
We'd have a pretty detailed plan, of course, but you know, we'd be throwing state-based resource assistance. We've got, TMR's got
Road tech.
Going, Jim. Road tech people, equipment and heavy equipment and people and resources, trucks or so we've been doing that first.
There's a big call for volunteers. They've got thousands of them lined up to come and assist.
Yeah.
You've got a minister asking you how they're going to be utilised. Do you have an opinion around the risks that comes to MSQ, WHS risks? Do you need to be trained to pick up oil, to pick up sludge off the beach?
To answer your question, yes, I do have an opinion on it. I'd be trying right away to volunteers as much as possible. Using our state-based resources, train people whenever possible. As you just described, and hinted at, there's a whole host of volunteers, particularly in these remote areas as well. And you've got, we're now talking north of Cape Flattery, mud flats, and some not very friendly wildlife. Other issues up there, because these toxic elements. So we keep it both.
Just on that, please, Angus. So Kel's correct. The national plan's view on volunteers these days is no, based on the risks that are associated with that. It's a good thing for them to be involved at a local level for community spirit, but there's big risks up there. There's crocs, there's oil, there's all this toxic shit. I mean, there's all sorts of things.
You'd have volunteers one day and protests the next.
Certainly would. And just touching back then to commercial considerations. You've obviously lost, the vessel's been lost, the cargo's been lost, the cleanup is considerable. How much attention are you paying to what is thrown at the cleanup? What is reasonable? What is potentially unreasonable? I suspect the government will have a viewpoint that everything is cleaned to beyond what it was when this occurred. What is P&I's view on that?
I suppose just touching on the volunteers first. So something like a state-led cleanup would be something that the state would then claim against owners underneath the Intervention Act. And particular private interests, who are cleaning up, who are not cleaning up, but who have been affected by, say, oil, will have a claim against the ship owner in terms of how clean is clean. That's something that our team has worked on before I started on the YM efficiency. So I think if I can just call on somebody in the audience to speak to that.
Is that you, Angus?
I know I was involved in YM efficiency, so I'm keen to hear this one. So
So I guess, Angus, thank you, Stefanie, for the throw. But I guess that how clean is probably one of the most contentious disputes between P&I clubs and governments worldwide, because, you know, governments will have a view about the cleanliness or the state that they would like the incident to be remediated to. P&I clubs are of the view, well, you know, we're happy to, and we've been out to both sides, so we see both sides of the coin. We're happy to deal with the incident and remove the wreck, but from then on, really the cleanup of the environment really should be a matter that a state deals with at the state level. And that's what, you know, country, every local jurisdiction should be responsible for their own environment. So that is probably, that very issue, I think internationally, is probably one of the most contentious issues in salvage today. So that dispute is going to involve teams of lawyers on both sides, and it's going to go on for years. So every single invoice that goes to the P&I club is going to get reviewed. They'll bring in experts, ITOP, and as well as independent consultants to review every cent, every amount claimed, and it'll be a long, hard fight.
That's a very good point. Going to your new, better system, apparently, Kel, does that capture all those sorts of decisions and invoices?
Yeah, well, it does. And as I said before, it's critical. We understand how critical it is. Bruce has described. You know, also not just us, as well, but also our colleagues involved to make this clean up happen. That the record keeping is critical.
So this goes to the very end of this now. Obviously, this incident now is completed. The cleanup is completed. The vessel is being broken up in situ because you've put it on a mud bank and there's no other way for it to get out of there. You've got an entire community now that have got this vessel for the next 2 years while it's cut into pieces. Investigations beyond that. Where would an investigation like this lie in terms of MSQ, AMSA, other bodies?
We'd probably take the lead on that, it being a commercial vessel. Yeah, we'd probably take the lead on that. I think.
Is there a standard that you have to adhere to from the IMO, or is it more an internal Australian government?
It's internal government. I mean, we conduct blame investigations where we apportion blame and identify where people haven't complied with the legislation. The ship caught fire, it's not really the master's fault it caught fire. It'd be very hard to determine with an army of fire safety inspectors where the fire started, what caused it. It's probably.
Okay, I'm just going to stop you there, and that's a really good point. How easy it is to investigate a fire that's burnt at this intensity? To try and understand the
actual point of ignition would be very difficult to, not getting much from that. So.
Okay, that answers that question.
So we'd be very reluctant to hold the master accountable for actions. He's probably got quite serious lung damage and she kept him on board for a day. I wanted to get him off in 2 hours.
Yeah.
Kept him on for another 22, so he's probably never going to walk again. So yeah, look, investigation, we'll try and fight and force it, but I think the nature of these fires, it's very difficult to investigate afterwards. We might have an idea of the records of the crew and that sort of stuff, but from a criminal aspect, it would be very difficult to mount a prosecution in this case, and I don't think there'll be a lot of appetite for it, to be honest. The master's probably done everything he could in an extremely difficult situation.
Well, would you have to keep the crew in the country?
Until they're recovered, probably, until they're safe to fly. We'd try and question them. Their lawyers would probably tell them not to say a thing. That's the nature of it, and that would be it. I mean, the VDR is probably destroyed. All the records on the vessel will be destroyed. It will be very difficult to investigate that incident.
I think from the state's perspective, Angus, we would seek a joint investigation or two separate investigations, one from AMSA and one from your mob at ATSB. We would see merit in that, which we've done before.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with that, Kel, but I think that's the way we should go. Yeah, for such a significant incident.
Yeah.
ATSB have to investigate.
ATSB doesn't have to investigate, but certainly something like this they would do. So the remit for ATSB, it can. But it can be directed by the minister to investigate if they choose not to investigate. But certainly something like this they would.
Because your investigation is safety focused, is there any reason why the crew would be advised not to participate in that investigation?
Well, they have to participate.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the crew would have to participate in ours. Yes, and that's an international standard, and that's a.
They'd have to participate in ours, but whether they tell us anything's another thing.
That's like you're
So-
encouraged, I think, to participate in this one. Say nothing to you.
Strongly encouraged for ours, or they, yeah, we do. Well, I mean, we will initiate charges if that's not the case.
If the ATSB was investigating, would we have to wait 3 or 4 years? Before they-
Oh, Perry, straight to the point. Perry, straight in there. Oh.
Investigation, so,
How many reports?
But yeah, so I think, I mean, to the point of ATSB's investigations are designed purely on safety outcomes, and they're also on safety action. So quite often, actually determining what went wrong is the easy bit, and that's done generally within the first 2 months or so. Then working with the parties that have safety issues that have reached the threshold of evidence and testing multiple hypotheses takes longer, and then working with those entities that have a safety action against them to rectify it takes even longer. An international carrier, we have to give at least 6 months for them to comment back on it. So you've already added sort of a year and a bit to that process, but yeah, interesting point, but yes.
You're a hard man, Perry.
You're not the first one to tell me that.
It's accelerated the publication by about 6 months since it's been there.
With that, look, thank you very much. Now I will open up to, we've still got some time and those online for questions. Thank you very much to the panel for your insights and to the audience as well. Obviously, we haven't gone through all the scenarios here. We've just touched on some of the things that may be of a consideration. It would be, as you can appreciate, and we only just got into it, enormously contentious across the whole of government and media and international expectations as well. They do play into it, not just subject matter experts giving their best advice that's followed. And I think we've all seen that from, we had, what was it just before the election? Not Shen Neng, it was
The Civic Adventure.
Civic Adventure, and that played into the election, and that certainly played into parts of the response. So the point of today was to start to think, and particularly those who are really interested and those who have expertise in the area, around these scenarios. And certainly EV carriage is something that is getting greater and greater attention, as it is with designing car spaces and the cost. I have an EV car, it's 3.5 tonnes. So it's more than every other car in the garage, but it's certainly no bigger than the other ones as well. So they're the things that governments are grappling with, the implications of those. We've just heard that TT Line are introducing their new fleet of vessels, and around they know that at the moment you'll have 0.5% of those vehicles will be EVs, but they won't be within the next 5 and 10 years. And how does that change the risk profile and the mitigations, and how does things like government regulation and AMSA regulation keep up with that? And how does agencies that are responsible for actually fighting the risk and putting mechanisms in place, how do they keep ahead of it? So thank you very much to the panel. I will now open up to the floor, but I'm going to start up the back. Do we have anyone on? Is there any online questions that?
Emergency services, if there are any thermal drones available.
Any
Thermal drones.
Oh, yes, yeah, definitely there is. Yeah, we're using them for all the wildfires at the moment and big structural factory fires. Yeah, so as long as we can get them out there, yeah, we do have them.
You saw that film from that Dutch ship just last month. I mean, they'd not put them on the sandbank. You saw that how they rescued that, just let it drifting. That maybe is a good thing in the future also here in Australia, then you're saving the reef.
Yes, and then obviously then
Good test case.
risk profiles will determine where you can take vessels and also the routes that potentially that you may use as well.
And the Coast Guard was helping out. There was a German Coast Guard vessel.
Yes, and for it being investigated by Panama, so our investigations take long. You won't even get one out of Panama.
Question for the captain, excuse my ignorance, but you said you keep the EV cars together. But it's a bit like dangerous cargo on a container ship. Are you limited on where you can put these on the car deck? I mean, would they all be in one place?
The,
Whereabouts would they be?
the plan is to have them on one place, but then we do have shipping lines. We do have ships coming into Brisbane with predominantly all EVs as well. So in that case, pretty much, majority of the car decks are all with EVs. So definitely, as he mentioned, they are heavier cars, so they will need a stronger deck strength as compared to normal ICE cars. So pretty much restricted.
Sorry, just one second question before. Would, for the next technique, would it be sensible for ships to have a tow line ready for things to pick up?
They're supposed to carry an ETA now. The problem is it's probably the aft mooring station, and the crew have got to get there to deploy, and that means going through the vehicle decks.
And most of those lines are synthetic, so they won't appreciate extremes of heat.
Yeah.
And even an unprotected wire through Panama leads will probably last 12 hours in moderate conditions. And you have to set chain through a Panama lead. If you're going to do it properly, that involves skill up on board the vessel, up on board the casualty to rig up and time.
And access.
And the speed of these fires and the intensity, the crew might not come back from the mooring stations.
But is it something that perhaps should be established?
It's
getting a line on quickly.
Well, it's a sort of quite carrying ETA now. It's kind of going to tanker level where the robustness and ability, that's another level, something we've got to look at.
Yes, I don't know how many in the room have read that there's a fairly large Norwegian ferry company, coastal ferry company, have banned EV vehicles on their ferries. And that's in a country where most Norwegians take a very critical time. So there is kickback against these EV vehicles rather than just filling up a whole ship with it.
And that, there's a parallel there that we've banned certain carriage of livestock as well for various reasons and for political reasons as well as for animal welfare.
Sort of Brisbane, we're seeing a lot of cars being put in containers as well. Sometimes 2 to 3 cars per container. Maybe it's permitted to actually be, if they do become more popularised, containerised, might be something to consider as well.
It is so. What's the likelihood of getting inside a container with a burning car?
Cars in that container.
You could flood it.
It's so easy to flood.
Just penetrate the top and flood it.
Yeah. Wondering, I'd like to my previous role in my previous life. Yeah, no. Grenades. So we've done a lot of work with thermite grenades, which burn over 1,000 degrees. Like they go through metal like butter. What's the certainty of, like, you've got synthetic detonation with those EVs, it could actually burn through the decks and then it's self-generating. Is there a possibility to burn through each deck to the point where it actually could go through the hull and that ship could actually see
It's from the Fremantle Highway, there's quite a lot of photos are coming out now where basically because of the weight of EVs now, because of the batteries, a lot of the construction's now been turned over to aluminium to lighten the weight because people are aware of the impacts. So we've got some photos, unfortunately we couldn't share them today, where basically the vehicle's melted into liquid aluminium and then the aluminium punched a hole in the deck and you have these massive aluminium stalactites. So I was reminded of photos from HMS Sheffield where the steel bought fire. So the upper decks are generally lighter steel or aluminium, so you'll have this kind of collapsing effect, and as you get down to the more heavier vehicle decks that are used for heavy plant and the main deck, that's obviously going to be a thicker, stronger steel. So far we haven't had a situation where you've had the collapse, but the kind of the bigger concern that we're looking at is the vapor cloud that gets produced by this. When you look at the Fremantle Highway, the whole deck's buckled up like this. And that's an enormous amount of pressure on the size of these things. It's like a car park, deflecting the steel up 2.5 meters. That's the force that comes off it. And it comes off very quickly. Every EV, for every kilowatt hour of battery life you have, you produce 6,000 litres of vapor, and half of that's hydrogen. You have a 3.5 ton EV like Angus with a 100 kilowatt battery. That's 600 cubes of vapor it's going to produce.
They call an EV fire an extremely low frequency but on the other end of
High consequence.
extremely high consequence if it has to happen. So, yeah.
And it's just one point, your point that your vehicle weighs 3.5 ton. If you're going to put all these things on deck level, 10, 11, 12, all that thing, your GM's bugger all now. So you're adding probably an extra ton and a half per vehicle up high. Your GM is going to be down so far, you start pouring water on board, not only with your free surface effect, but your GM is going to go past So your stability problem starts almost immediately. You start fighting that fire because of the extra weight up so high with those EVs.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a difficult thing for the scenario today, is to play out how things are likely to unfold. And so, which is why some of it is based on what happened on the Fremantle Highway, which I still haven't quite understood how intense was the fire in terms of how many EVs. I think it was 490 something. But as I said, it's being investigated by Panama. So
statistically, it's one of the few ships that's still afloat. EV fire.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We're not sure why that happened. Whether the tugs managed to cool down or what happened. But I think, like I said at the start, our concern is getting the crew off, save your life, and
That's where you have to ask for a pay rise then.
So that probably brings us, we're right on 3 o'clock now, and I know there's people who've dialed in as well, and others who perhaps have to go back to work. So I will wrap it up and say thank you very much to Nautical Institute for putting this together and for putting such a distinguished panel here. And thanks for everyone for turning up today. It's
Wasn't that amazing? The panel not only managed to unpack so much of knowledge and understanding on such a variety of topics with such depth and clarity. So let's hear it from them again. I'm certainly walking away from here feeling like an expert on a number of topics that I had no idea about. But at the same time, I also have a burning 1,000 questions in my head. So if you are feeling the same way, good thing is that we'll be making this presentation, the event online, available online on the Nautical Institute website, as well as their YouTube channel. So you are more than welcome to revisit and watch it as much time you want. Now, as a token of our appreciation, we have some small gifts for the panel. So, please.
This. Yeah, it's like accepting a chairman's club now.
Yes, thank you. Thanks very much for attending. Very good opportunity. Thank you.
You want to swap it? You were told very clearly, this is the only thing which would work. Thanks. Thank you.
Repetition. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being a wonderful audience and keeping it very interactive. Okay.